You may have used a KVM switch where you can connect the keyboard, mouse, and video of multiple systems to the same switch box and switch between them using input buttons or remote control or however, or a keyboard press. There's also KVM over IP, which allows you to connect your keyboard, video, and mouse to a device that's connected anywhere on your network. KVM over IP is really nice because I can remotely control a system that's, say, in my server closet or some is over here in my bookshelf. Any system that's in my house, I can actually connect the KVM over IP device to it and be able to control it from my computer and see the screen. So I have before me a KVM over IP device called TinyPilot Voyager. And this one is the 2A model, which is the newest model they have. Full disclosure, they sent me this device free of charge for me to review. They didn't pay me to do this review, but they did sponsor this device. The opinions in my video and my written review of this are my own opinions. So I wanted to do a quick unboxing of TinyPilot. I actually haven't looked into it very much other than open the box up a little bit before I turn this video on. There's a packing slip. And here's the device. As you can see, it's just pretty much one little box here, which is interesting. So let's open this up. All right, here is the TinyPilot Voyager 2A. I'll show a close up here in a second. And then we have we have a USB-C cable and a TinyPilot, their logo. Okay. And then this is a, looks like a power adapter. All right. Which says USB-C. Okay. Okay, now that we have all this things off to the side here, as you can see on the front of the TinyPilot, there are the usual ports for the Raspberry Pi with the Ethernet port and several USB ports. On the back side, there's an HDMI port that you'll connect to the system you wish to control, as well as a data USB-C port that with this cable here, you can connect it for your mouse and keyboard to the system you wish to control. And there's also a power, USB-C power port here as well to power this device. And then you have a micro SD card on the bottom, which is easy to get to. It's not inside the case, which is nice. You can pull it out and upgrade it in whatever you need to do or replace it. If you have the PoE version of this device, which is new to this version, the previous version did not have a PoE version, you actually just plug a Ethernet cable in the front and just power this device without needing the USB-C power cord on the back, which is very cool. I'm going to test that out because I got the PoE version because I like PoE, and I think many of you probably do as well. One thing I noticed with this new revision is the case on this is actually metal instead of the first version was actually made out of 3D printed plastic. So this makes this device feel much more polished and refined and more substantial and solid. And it actually has a little more weight to it. So it's actually kind of nice. With the rubber feet and stuff on it, doesn't feel like it's going to go anywhere. So what I'm going to show you now is what the inside of the TinyPilot looks like. I'm not going to take it completely apart because I realize there's a ribbon cable for the HDMI connector that's actually pretty short. And I'm afraid if I take off, there's a little plastic piece that holds down ribbon cable that slides into the slot. It's just like laptop ribbon cables to keep them really thin. They design them that way, but I'm afraid that if I take it out right now, it'll be difficult for me to try to get my hand down in there to push it in there, and that'd be frustrating to try to get that cable back in. So I'm going to try to show you the best I can with all the cables connected in. So as you can see, the very bottom is the Raspberry Pi, as you can see with the normal interfaces here on the Raspberry Pi, and on top of that is I got the PoE version, so there's a PoE hat here. This might look a little bit different if you don't get if you get the non-PoE version. I'm not sure. It might not have this card here on top, and if you notice, the fan is right here in the device. It's right here on the side of it. It actually connects on the top of the PoE. There's some pins here that you can pull out, which is pretty simple. There are some pins here that actually goes to the HDMI. Inside here, there's an HDMI capture card. That's what this little device is, a little HDMI capture board to capture the video signal. You can see this ribbon cable is the one I'm worried about taking out right now because I'd have to try to, the way I'm holding it right now, I can maybe try to get my finger down in there, but but I have to be able to hold that ribbon in place and try to put this little black plastic piece in there. But anyway, I'm just going to kind of show you this because you can hopefully see this with the light. And that's pretty much all there is to the TinyPilot, just the Raspberry Pi with PoE hat and an HDMI capture card. What I'd like to do now is show how to set up the TinyPilot to be able to remotely control a PC such as this from another PC such as this. Suppose you have a PC with your mouse and keyboard that's connected to your network here, and then you have another PC that's connected to the network also, and then you have the TinyPilot. So what you need to do, the TinyPilot needs to be connected to the PC that you want to control. So let's do that now. Let's start with HDMI cable. On the back side, you'll see there's an HDMI port. That's actually going to go to TinyPilot, and it's going to plug into the HDMI port of your computer, just like a normal KVM. And then you'll use the USB-C cable that came with the TinyPilot, and you'll plug that into the data port. It's labeled on the TinyPilot, and then you plug that into a USB port on the side of your PC. And then if you have the version of the TinyPilot that does not have PoE, you need to plug it into the power port on there, and you just need to plug that in to this power strip, for example. And then finally, you'll want to connect your TinyPilot to the network. So we'll just do that right now. We'll connect it there, connect it there. So all three of these devices, this would be your two computers and then your TinyPilot, are all connected to the network. So what you'll end up doing is you'll be using this computer with the mouse and keyboard. It's going to send the mouse and keyboard commands across the network to the TinyPilot via a web interface that you access on the TinyPilot, and it will send the mouse and keyboard commands over to your system that's connected on your network, and it will also send the video feed from your PC over here to the TinyPilot, so you can see everything through the web interface that you can see on this PC as though you're plugged directly in with a monitor, which is really cool because that means you can reboot this system and you can get into the BIOS and see all the settings and actually install an operating system remotely through TinyPilot to the web interface, which you can actually remotely mount media as well, which is really cool. I'll demonstrate some of these things later, but this is basically how you set it up. So as you can see, all you need to do is plug the TinyPilot into the network and plug the mouse and keyboard via USB. It just needs a single cable, and then the HDMI. So you just need to plug in 3 cables to this TinyPilot. If you have the non-PoE version, you'll actually have a 4th cable with a power cable. So you have 3 cables on the back and 1 on the front, right? So that's all you need to do to actually connect this up. And it's very simple. Okay, now what I'm going to do is show you the original version of the TinyPilot and how it's different than the TinyPilot and how it actually connects different. They've actually streamlined the cabling, so it's actually not quite as intense, which is really nice. Just to show you a difference in comparison of plugging this stuff in. You see all this with the old version, you have this little control box that has a power switch on it, on the box. And this plugs into your HDMI-C port on your TinyPilot, your Raspberry Pi that's in the TinyPilot. And it splits off the data and power into 2 separate cords. And so one of the cords is the power plug that you actually just plug in, right? And then the other plug is what you actually plug into your PC. So as you can tell, looking at the new one, all you do is plug in 1 cord directly to your PC and 1 cord directly to your power source, or if you're using PoE, you don't even need that. You could just plug in the network cable. So you don't have to have this extra little splitter box with the power switch in it. It's actually kind of like the splitter sort of built into the box itself. It has 2 different outputs on it, which is very nice. You don't have to have this extra little dongle. And so I really like how the new box is a lot more streamlined. So I guess the only disadvantage of the new one might be the size is a little bit bigger. So if you want the very smallest possible device, the original one's a little bit smaller. But I think the trade-off's worth it. You have a nice metal case, which probably helps with heat dissipation. The fan can actually be located on the side of the device. So that probably helps with cooling because looks like there's some air vents on this side here. Now let's look at the TinyPilot's web interface to see what features are available in the software now that we've looked at the hardware. As you can see at the top, there are several menu options, which I'll go through in a minute, and you'll see the desktop of the PC that I'm controlling remotely, as well as an on-screen keyboard here. This on-screen keyboard is actually useful if you want to do commands like Control-Alt-Delete. There are certain things that you can't send through the browser, because if you do Control-Delete on your system that you're controlling this from, you actually will bring up like your task manager or something like that on your operating system of your main system you're using instead of the system you're trying to control. So that's there are some uses for having a keyboard here, besides just clicking around on it. One new feature of this keyboard is it's actually overlaid on top of the screen, so it's shown at the bottom basically instead of below. Before it was shown below the screen you were controlling, so you'd have to scroll the browser or web page down to get to the keyboard, which is a little harder to get to. So it's kind of nice they put that up here where it's easier to reach and get to. So if you want to, you can click on this arrow to hide it. One thing I noticed is there's no way to bring it back on the user interface, so it'd be nice if there was like a little button or something here to bring it back, because it'd be more convenient to hide and show the keyboard. So if you close out the keyboard, you have to go up to View and then click Show Keyboard to bring it back. But we'll close this out so we can see better. Down at the bottom, you'll see if you're connected or not, because if you lost connection and you still have the browser page open, you'll see that you lost the connection here, which is helpful to know. And you'll see what kind of video format that you're using. It's either going to be H.264 or Motion JPEG. I changed this to H.264 because one of the new features of the TinyPilot is the fact that it can play audio. So that's actually pretty cool. You can hear the audio of the system that you're controlling remotely. It's pretty neat to have that feature. I'm not sure how much it'd be used if you're doing system administration, but it could be handy if you're trying to control a desktop for some reason, and maybe you just want to listen to music or something, or watch a video real quick or something, right? You can actually do that with having the audio. So that's a really cool feature that they've added, as well as the keyboard. They've modified that since the original software. So now let's go look at the system menu. You can see with security, you can actually enable SSH, HTTPS, and those sorts of things. You can make the web interface have a username and password to get in. So if you want to protect that a little bit from just someone browsing and controlling your machine, it's probably not a bad idea to add those things if you're worried about somebody controlling your machine on your network that you don't want to have access to your network. Virtual media is very cool because you can actually add disk images that you can use to install operating systems or whatever on the system that you're controlling. And you can do this remotely, which is very neat to have this ability to do this. This allows you to install operating systems without having to actually plug something into the machine that you're controlling. So I really like that option. That's a very cool option to have. I've actually tried that out before. And then of course you have your system updates. I'm at the latest version, as you can see here. Yep. I actually updated this version to the latest that had the audio and the keyboard, so I could show you what it looks like, because mine was actually one version older with the flash card that I got. The host name, you can change it. It defaults to TinyPilot, but I made it TinyPilot-2A so I can differentiate it on my network between my other TinyPilot that I have. And then you got video settings, which is where you can change from Motion JPEG to H.264. Motion JPEG is enabled by default, but H.264 can give you better quality, as well as gives you the ability to have audio, which is very cool. One thing I noticed is the website of TinyPilot says it only gives you 24 frames a second, but this actually says you can get 30 frames a second on the web interface. So I'm not sure if it's really 24 frames a second or if it's actually 30 frames a second. That's kind of interesting that it says you can get 30 frames a second. It seems pretty smooth when I'm watching video and stuff, so it's hard to tell if it's 24 or 30. I'm not sure why there's a difference there in what the description says and what the web interface says. But you can set your bit rate here, so you can control how much bandwidth's going across your network. So you can reduce that if you want to free up network bandwidth at the expense of image quality. One thing that I'll note is the resolution that you're allowed to have for the TinyPilot is up to 1080p resolution. So if you're looking for something that has higher than 1080p resolution, you won't be able to get it with the TinyPilot. So that's one disadvantage potentially for you, especially if you're using this as a remote desktop replacement. You might want to have a higher resolution if you're actually working off that system, on a regular basis. But as far as remote administration is concerned, 1080p is plenty, because especially if you're controlling a system, it's just like a server that's command line only. and it doesn't have IPMI, so you can actually just control the console, which you don't need 1080p for that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If you're looking for something higher in 1080p, you have to look for other solutions. It probably costs a lot more than the TinyPilot to get 4K resolution. I'm not sure on all the prices on those. I've only had experience with the TinyPilot for reviews, which is my personal experience. And you can see some debug logs here that you can kind of scroll through and see if there's any issues here. And it's kind of cool because you can get a shareable URL and hide sensitive data and those sorts of things, because you can share that with the TinyPilot team if you're actually having issues. And that shareable URL is pretty cool if it's a nice way to send them your system logs if you need it. And of course, you got power options to shut down, restart your machine. And then as far as for actions, when you want to paste something into here, it actually brings up this screen. It says press Control V to paste from the clipboard. You can't actually, without clicking paste, if you hit Control V inside of the screen here, it's only going to copy paste what you've copy and paste on the remote system. It won't copy and paste. It won't paste the contents from your system to the remote system. It's only on that system. So one way they do this pasting from your system to that system is this paste option. So this allows you to do the copy paste, which is very handy. I use that all the time to paste like commands and stuff like that. So it's a little bit annoying. You have to click paste every time, but at least I'm able to paste the data in from my system if I'm like trying to set up some things and I don't want to type it all out all the time. And then you can click screenshot, and that will bring up a dialog box to save your screenshot. Waco on LAN is you can put your MAC address to send a Waco on LAN to another device, which is pretty cool. So this allows you to wake up the system you're wanting to control from the TinyPilot. So that's very neat to be able to do that. You can do a keyboard shortcut for Control-Alt-Delete, because if you want Control-Alt-Delete on that remote system and not your local system, you have to use that or use the keyboard, on-screen keyboard. And with View, you can change your cursor to different things. You can actually see it when you mouse over it: crosshair, dot, pointer, and none, right? None is helpful if you only want to see the remote cursor, which there'll be some lag and delay. And then you got to show the keyboard, which I showed earlier, and then enable key history. The key history is what you're typing. It'll show at the bottom corner. I'll show you in a second. And then full screen mode, and then of course got some help options here. See, if I'm typing in stuff, you can see down here at the bottom corner of my screen, you see how it shows all the most recent keys that I pressed down in the right hand corner. So that's what that option is right here, enable key history. Full screen is cool if you just want to see how it's now full screen. Of course, it cuts off the side there with how I have my screen here, but basically it's full screen mode, or makes you feel like you're actually on the screen. One thing I wanted to show is web browser here. If you don't want to say a YouTube video, I'll show if I'm playing this calming music of this coral reef fish, right? I just found a random video on YouTube, and you can see the audio will play through, which is very nice. So that's pretty cool. It shows you how that works. I had an issue for some reason when I first switched over. I thought I clicked H.264, but it still showed motion JPEG. And I was wondering why the audio wasn't working, and I just ended up rebooting the system to make sure I didn't get something in a state that was kind of strange, because I was playing around with the TinyPilot. But after I rebooted and I switched I think I already had my input in H.264, it actually showed up properly, and then I was able to switch back and forth without issue. So I'm not sure what quite happened there, but at least it did switch over properly, and I had no issues with the audio after I did that. So that's pretty cool. I want to show you something real quick. I want to reboot the system, and I'll show you that because it's taken the HDMI feed from that system and has the USB plugged in for the mouse and keyboard through the TinyPilot, how I can control the system from the very beginning. You can see everything just like you're directly on the system, which is very cool to be able to do that remotely. As you can see, it'll say no signal because it's rebooting. You see, I can see the BIOS loading up here, which is pretty cool. So you can see all those options that you would normally see if you're directly on the system. I use the TinyPilot like on a regular basis for all my stuff that I'm using to test out different network configurations for my videos and for my website. I actually like not having to have a keyboard, mouse, and stuff hooked up to those devices. I just kind of have to swap some cables around. One recommendation that I actually would like to do, but I don't have any extra KVMs, is you can actually connect your TinyPilot to another KVM, which is something I thought about doing because I can actually control multiple systems with the TinyPilot because it only controls one device at a time because it doesn't have multiple inputs like a KVM switch does. So you could actually put a KVM behind the TinyPilot that you can maybe, if you can do a key press or something like that, you can control switching the inputs remotely as well, which would be very neat. One feature I'd like to go back to is the virtual media feature to show what you can do with this feature. It's very, to me, it's a critical feature to have if you're going to do remote administration on a machine, is to be able to remotely mount a disk image so you can actually install operating system on your machine remotely, or any other purpose you might want to load an image for. So if you go to System and Virtual Media, I already preloaded the Ubuntu desktop image because it takes a little bit of time to do that. So I just went ahead and did it. All you do is click Add Disk Image and from a computer from a URL, and it'll upload it to TinyPilot. That's why it's handy to have that 32 gigs of storage with SD card that it comes with. Is it copies the ISO to the TinyPilot, so it's actually on that memory card. So yeah, definitely need that little extra storage if you're going to use virtual media. So for the actions, you actually want to mount this image. Okay, so there's other options here you can see. You can see if you want to mount it as a flash drive or a CD-ROM, so that's kind of interesting. You can, but by default, it's like it shows up like a USB drive. There might be some times where you might want to boot it as, or have it show up as like a CD-ROM versus a flash drive. There might be some need for that. So let's close this out, and as you can see, it shows up on the operating system that we have an Ubuntu 22.04 LTS disk image on our USB thumb drive. It's not really on a USB thumb drive, but if we go and reboot this system, okay, it should boot into that installation. As you can see, we're booting up now. As you can see, it loaded up the try or install Ubuntu. So this is actually our thumb drive, because if you actually have Ubuntu installed on your system, it won't give you this try or install option. So we can click try or install, and it's actually going to load off that disk image that we put on that TinyPilot. So it's very cool. So it's actually booting a live image now. Okay, as you can see, it brought up the try or install Ubuntu dialog box. So you can see we're actually booting from the live media and not the operating system that's already installed on the machine. So that actually worked. And so actually I could install Ubuntu if I wanted to. I hope you found this review of the TinyPilot Voyager 2A to be helpful and informative in deciding if you wish to purchase a device such as this to remotely administrate your machines on your network. I showed how they improved this design over their previous generation model with a more substantial case and less cabling, and they actually have a PoE option, which is great to be able to have that option, so you can have even less cabling than you would normally. I also like to thank TinyPilot for giving me the opportunity to review this product, because I think it's a nice product that a lot of people might want to wish to use in their either their home networks or their businesses. So until next time, I hope you have a great day.